What's going on, beautiful J4 family? Welcome to another edition of Two Fathers and Two Sons Chopping It Up. Today it's just the fathers, and we're going to be talking about white mothers and their biracial black sons, represented in the persona of myself and Mr. Gene Boyd. Gene, how you doing, brother?
Yes, sir. Good evening, Brother Jones. It's a good night to be alive.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. So tonight we are going to dedicate this episode to Al B. Sure. He was.
I'll be sure not Christopher Williams.
Yeah, not Christopher Williams. Yeah, mix them up, right? How many arguments have you been in with people? That's not. I'll be sure. That's Christopher Williams. It's the guy that got his hand stabbed at
New Jack
City, right? No, but we want to send a special shout out to the light skinned mogul. I'll be sure. Dominated the late 80s and the early 90s. I know he's just coming off some major gallbladder life-threatening surgery, so we wish him safe recovery. That's but right. in the spirit of light-skinned nuance, you can't have a light-skinned conversation without tipping your hat to Mr. Al B. Sure. Thank you, beautiful family, for coming in and joining us. We're going to have some fun this evening talking about kind of the nuance and dance of being biracial within not only a contemporary America, but also when we were born, biracial meant a different kind of thing. In fact, I was born in 1968. Gene, I think you were 71, maybe?
71. Yep.
In 1970, the percentage of biracial children was 1%. In the mid 1960s, it was illegal in 17 states to have biracial marriage. The Loving case kind of comes to mind. So it was rare, rare to have biracial children in the latter part of the 60s, early 70s. And in most instances, as in my case, it was typically black GIs married to foreign women. That was my experience. But you had a little different experience. So let's kick this thing off, Gene. Biracial wasn't common. So how did your parents kind of come together or hook up or produce Mr. Gene Boyd?
Yeah, very, very interesting story. And I'll give you give the family the truncated version. But
okay.
My father had located himself in Los Angeles, California, by way of Kansas City, Missouri, and had actually come out there as a military man himself, to your point.
Okay.
Yeah, yep, and then transition into a faith-based path by which he got involved with some churches and ultimately started to kind of climb the ladder in leadership in the church sector.
Okay.
And so the church that he happened to be located at that time was named Mount Zion Missionary Baptist Church in South Central Los Angeles. My mother, on the other hand, was located in Arkansas,
okay,
and had gone to Oklahoma Baptist University, which is a neighboring state. And as part of their experience at Oklahoma Baptist, they, much like what we would think about in the Mormon church, would do a mission.
Okay.
And so her mission was out into South Central Los Angeles. I mean, just immediately after the Watts riots and all, the 60s, 67, 68 time period. And
so your white mother,
my white mother,
goes on a quasi mission to Watts.
Right.
Okay.
And hadn't had much experience even around people of color, let alone African American folks. And so it was a very tenuous faith-based experience for her. And she located at that same church, and so that's how they met. And in their interactions, he was on the staff, and she was also now working on the staff. They began to commingle, and as they say, the rest is history.
Right.
Became a love interest, and then a whole litany of other dynamics along the way as that went on. So we'll talk about that soon.
And maybe we can get into some of that. So welcome, thank you guys for joining us. This is a reminiscent conversation for Gene and I. Growing up, born to white mothers. In my case, I was born to a white European mother. In 1962 62, my father finished high school, and his first assignment was to France, of all places. And so they met in France. My mother's literally from France, and they met there, and began to court and date, and eventually got to the point of contemplating marriage. I've talked with my pops about this. I probably need to go a little bit deeper, but he left Gary, Indiana, an all-black city at the time, and wanted to explore the world, and saw the Air Force as a way of doing that. And then his first assignment was a piece of the world outside the United States. And so you got this young 18-year-old, handsome dude. They called him Boga, which means pretty guy in French. So he's out in France, just living it up, single man, in a black GI space, still coming off civil rights, the military still dealing with segregation of sorts, but yet they have a chance to experience the town, right? They get a chance to go into the city, and they would go to nightclubs. And my mother was a dancer, and she would love to dance and love music, particularly jazz and soul. And so she found her way to one of these clubs, and my dad happened to be there, and they kind of kicked it off and got serious, to the point to where they decided to get married. I believe somewhere probably around 64, 65. I think Granddad's in here, he can correct me. But lo and behold, they moved back to the United States of America. And so you had a European white woman married to a black GI arriving in the United States in the Midwest in around 66 or so. And then in 1968, I was born within that context. So my mother did not have an American orientation to race. She had probably a very niche orientation to race, Gene, in the sense that she was probably drawn to a blackness represented in a military, airman kind of a space, but also black music was pretty heavy on the scene in Paris and France at the time. So her perception of blackness was rooted in sort of this military, highly organized, young men coming off boot camp, strong, and all that kind of stuff. And then this chicness related to black musicians. Yeah. So when she came to America, her perception and participation in a blackness had to just be, had to be mind blowing for her.
Yeah, AJ, as different as those experiences were for both pairs, for both couples, there's a lot of similarity in this, separated life being,
right,
and then gets commingled in a space and time that made some sense. Again, in my parents' situation, in the black church environment, in the civil rights era and all those kind of things. And again, to your point, the collision. I remember one story about them having driven. They drove across some state lines to visit some family, and were coming back through Texas, and actually got pulled over and harassed, because of the reality of their situation. And so, from the very beginning, for both pairs in this country, there was some tumult, to say the least.
Travel and safety, around a blackness has always been there in the community, but you add this layer, this is 1970, 1% of them were there. The approval rating for mixed marriage was less than 20% compared to closer than 80% today. There was a certain courage and maybe even a youthful naivete to all of that. My parents did travel, but I don't recall racialized stories. I do recall being raised in a military environment that there was a certain kind of either coerced acceptance of it, or you didn't rear your racial nuance, at least in any demonstrative kind of way, because you had this regulatory dynamic to where your job, your income was tied to your behavior, and that could be altered or corrected based upon employment status. And so there were quite a few kids my age married to Korean. Mothers were Korean, fathers were black, French, German, and so we had this little biracial light-skinned circle that kind of normalized biracialness for me until I left the Air Force Base life in probably the 8th grade, and then went to what was a predominantly black school, and my identity nuance just started kind of, okay, what's going on here, right?
Hey, brother, similarly, and the parallels of the stories, although they're so different, is pretty amazing. I grew up in Carson, California, in a probably lower middle class black community. There was a gang in this community. It was a Crip gang, Stevenson Village Crip gang.
Yep.
Was in the community, but I was very sheltered early on from that, just due to the fact that my father was a minister. He had a church. He actually pastored a church in Compton.
Okay.
And so, we were either always at church or at the Christian school that we went to in Gardena.
Okay.
Gardena Valley Christian School, which was it was the whole rainbow, man. It had Asian and black and Hispanic and white. I mean, it literally had a representation from many different ethnic backgrounds, and it was a very safe space. You had chapel every day, and all the talk was about loving your neighbor, and all. I mean, yeah, right. Man, it was a little bit of a nirvana, during that time period. And when my mom and dad separated, I was about 9 years old, in between the 3rd and 4th grade, and it was like at that moment, man.
Yeah,
we were thrown. When I say we, me and my brother in particular, were kind of thrown into just this harsh reality of inner city, Los Angeles County, gang infested. You get on, you ride the bus to school, and that this area where the bus is coming from, everybody knows is a different gang set than this gang set.
Yeah.
It was Nutty Block Crips over here, Stevenson Village Crips over here, and if you got off that bus, you were marked, and there was going to be some conversations about where you were from. Yep. Not to mention that at that point in time, I had blonde hair, still had blue eyes. I had myself parted like this. It was
wavy.
No, it was straight, brother. At that point in time, and I looked like a straight up 100% white boy. Right. And so, getting off that bus and being the only white looking human being in the school created a nuance for me as related to my identity and my standing and my understanding of self and who I was, and all that, man, was in question from day one.
Man, we're going to get on that definitely, G. But let me stay with the hair concept. So I was the reverse. In fact, to be all transparent, neither one of you are the darkest brothers in the world, and we're neither the darkest light-skinned brothers in the world. And if you were to literally look at our melanin content or the absence of it, we appear, very very white, right? And so a marker for me in terms of a navigated parlay into blackness was always my hair, right? And I struggled with my hair. I think my mom struggled with my hair for the longest time. And this is one of my sort of pathways into a blackness. It wasn't until 8th grade at that predominantly black school, Jim Bridger, it was a Crip school, that Mr. Gilchrist, a member of Omega Psi Phi, I was combing my hair forward at the time, Gene. It was ridiculous. Combing my hair forward, right? So he had the afro and then come out. He looked at me, man. He said, "Man, what is wrong with you, young brother?"
Right.
He literally hired a woman to come to my house to give me my first shag. The shag, the shag lay down.
Come on, now.
But dog, you talk about transformative. This was a black man looking at this light-skinned kid that's struggling, trying to figure it out. It got me my first shag. It was also evidence of black male love for black young man, in a very positive, healthy, constructive way. And symbolically, I went from confusion to at least aesthetically with the shag. It was long, boy, the shag was laid, Gene, to kind of being in a blackness. And that was one sort of small incremental step into a black security. What I mean by that is being secure in a blackness.
Right.
But there have been times where that was not blatant. That was not obvious for me. I kind of lived in the margins of two worlds, right? Sometimes feeling like an imposter, like that, I'm gonna get figured out, right? Or just feeling like, am I 100 here? What's the case may be. So, Gene, to ask it pointedly, when did you become black? If you did, when did you become black?
Man, that's a can of worms. Man. And
It's a
I
serious question, right? When did you become black?
if
Only biracial kids can ask that. Yep.
if I'm being completely honest, I spent you know, at age 9, I probably saw myself as a very fair skinned biracial kid with a black dad and a white mom. It's probably what I saw myself as.
Literally.
As we integrated into the community that we lived in, and then went to the school and all in Compton. I saw myself culturally as black from day one, but I never felt accepted as black. I always, from day one, felt like I had to prove blackness in some way or another. And the tactics, man, that I took that, because the hair. Hey, I didn't have that hair situation. I didn't have that hair transformation. You know, now I cut my own hair. I got a little fade and everything. You know, but I didn't have that hair transformation, man, for probably about another 4 or 5 years. Really probably went until I went to high school. And so I didn't have the hair thing, man. In fact, like I said, I had this parted, stringy white hair, man, and
blue eyes.
Oh, brother, it was a constant literal fight, man. Because think about it, man. When things would be happening in the post civil rights era, in the mid 70s, late 70s, that were racially charged, I was what everybody saw as the enemy. Even as a 4th grader, as a 5th grader, as a 6th and 7th grader.
Right.
You know, so some of that energy would come my way, and I would be constantly saying like, "Nah, man, I'm one of you.
Right.
I'm one too, man." You know, so man, it was a very confusing moment, and I'll be extremely honest, man. I've been to some therapy over my lifetime to dig into how my identity foundation was built. And the insecurities and lack of acceptance around that have plagued me for a good portion of my adulthood. I wouldn't say that there's not residual effects from that today, man. So you want to talk about this dichotomy of internal feeling? Right. I tell you, man. One time, we had this school writing contest, and I was one of the winners of it. And if you won, you had to get up on the stage and personify the person you wrote about. And for me, much like your love for Dr. King, it was Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.
Right.
And so I got up on this stage, brother, and I said in front of this whole cafeteria full of black children, "I am Dr. Martin Luther King Jr." Yeah. Laughed me off the stage, man.
No, they didn't.
Oh, straight up. One of the vice principals or somebody had to step in and be like, "Hey, everybody, come on now, be respectful."
You know? I mean, we're laughing and we're talking in jest, but yeah, that was real, right?
100%. And the shot that I took to my identity and my just my personality and my self-esteem. I mean, man, it was hard to come back from. You know, it was a challenge.
Wow. Well, all right. Let me catch up to you there, and then maybe start back there about how you kind of bounce back from that.
Right.
I say I lived in the proverbial gray, as I like to say, probably until I was 16. And that's unfortunately when my parents got divorced. And so I was no longer in a physical space where I was having to be mindful of white maternal feeling, right? You know, biracial son, black father, although my pops was pretty neutral when it came to that. But when they divorced at 16 and I went to live with my dad, it was not only a literal immersion into an all-black household minus white mother, but it was also a psychological transition and giving myself permission to just be in blackness.
Right.
I struggled in biracial worlds, largely in white circles, again, back to my hair, because when young people banter and they want to kind of one-up a person, a lot of times they'll go for things that are phenotypes, things that they can see.
That's right.
So my white friends would always go at my hair, right? And then I realized early on in the process that someone could out me or in-group me based upon something that was biological and aesthetic. And I said, I can never change that, which means I can never not be vulnerable to your playful critique or your cutting critique.
Right.
So I said, fuck you.
Right.
I said, fuck you to youth whiteness. You're not going to make me vulnerable to that. And I'm going to lean towards blackness because of one of two ways. I discovered that you could gain acceptance into blackness as long as you could hold your own. Right.
Right.
And there was a pathway into accepted blackness. For me, that was initially, holding my own with that mouthpiece, right? Talking a little shit in the sports, standing up if someone kind of stepped to me, just gaining a rep that I wasn't an aggressive guy, but you just couldn't run over me, right? And so I kind of stood on my own 2 feet there. And also that if I had a curiosity and a love, if I demonstrated that in my dealings and in my habits and my works, that I could gain membership into blackness. But from 16 to roughly about 19, I was testing the waters, Gene, just trying to figure it out, because I had been hurtfully vulnerable to whiteness, but I had been challenged or tested vulnerability to blackness. This right quick. I remember one time I was in Gary, Indiana for the summer playing baseball, and it was all black city, all black team, and I was in left field, and I had on my jersey, and it's there, right? But I had my hands kind of on my knees, and there was these 2 girls behind me, 2 young sisters that were like, "Hey, now," they couldn't see me, they were just talking, right? But then I moved my arms out, and they saw the white skin, and it's like, he's white. I had to be like 13, but that's like a sting in my head, right?
Yeah.
And, I was vulnerable to whiteness, and then I was a curiosity to blackness. But through the divorce, through black immersion, and then through a decision literally at that moment that was then manifested in college, I said, forget the proverbial gray. I'm not going to be vulnerable to whiteness in any way. Blackness historically, and even in those moments, had a pathway for my membership, and I never turned back then.
Yeah.
All right. You declaring Dr. King on the stage. Your peer pressure is hard and heavy coming at you.
Yeah.
Where'd you go from there?
Yeah, man. Sports became a pathway towards an elevated self-worth. Because when it's all said and done, when you put yourself on the field of play or on the court or whatever else the case is, you just judge for your performance, man.
Mm-hmm.
And all the monikers and the names, they used to call me Casper. Right?
Yeah. They call you Casper?
They used to call me Casper.
Yeah, right? I had Casper here or there.
Friendly ghost. So once you get out there, man, I remember playing flag football at the park. And again, the only white looking kid, man. And I could catch the ball. I could catch the hell out of the ball. Mm-hmm. And my grit and determination, I was going to outwork everybody, right? And so those things would press forward, and people would go, okay, this little white boy can play. But I would still be going like, I'm not a white boy, right?
Right.
I remember I played on this basketball team, man, probably in the 6th grade, and they would call me Rambus. Now, if you're a Laker fan, Kurt Rambis, yeah. So we in this whole, but AJ, we in this whole park system, man, with teams that have all black kids and some Polynesian kids and all. Mm-hmm. And again, man, I'm the only white looking kid. So yeah, I got tagged with Rambis. So even in that sport piece, as I was growing and had moments where I could poke my chest out a little bit, there was a label that would kind of push it back down, man. I remember when I made the transition through 8th grade into high school, and my first year in high school, and this is transitioned into a piece of how I chose and self-selected to validate myself, which also didn't work, right, in my life's work. But I made a determination, like you said, about foregoing, not necessarily foregoing whiteness, but not just accepting that there's this whiteness piece. I was always going to have a black girlfriend. Okay. Yeah. 100% of the time. There was not even a consideration for anybody else. Mm-hmm. And I went to the 9th grade, man, and first couple of weeks of school, you know how it is. Everybody kind of get to meet each other and all this and that and the other. Mm-hmm. And a couple of my friends and other girls that I knew from my 1 year in junior high in that school district were coming by and saying, hey, man, this girl Erica likes you. Erica was a white girl. And I had no game, brother. I mean, again.
You had a hard life, brother.
Hey man, hey, I'm telling you, man, when they would have the little block parties, and someone had the garage up and playing the music and Earth, Wind and Fire and everything else, boy, I was holding up the wall strong.
Right.
No one can knock this room down. But it's Erica like me, and man, I said no, I cannot be seen upon entry into this school environment with a white girl because that takes away from my identity. Right. Bro, do you know that I went back to the little neighborhood apartment complex that we lived in that had nothing but black and brown people and gang members and all kind of stuff. We had moved over to another city called Paramount at that time. Mm-hmm. And one of the young girls, man, I'm probably 14, she's 13. I said, hey, I need you to put a hickey on my neck.
You need some credibility, right?
No, it wasn't credibility. Hey, it wasn't for credibility. It was so that everybody could see, including Erica, that I already had somebody, man. I didn't know how to talk to this girl and say, nah, I'm not interested. Oh. Boy, I went to that end to make sure that I didn't get paired up with a white girl, man.
Wow. Let's stay here a minute, Gene. This is so heavy. So first of all, earlier on, you talked about the mental angst that biracial kids will go through. For those of y'all listening in, that very much was a reality for our era. And I would venture to say it's also a very strong reality for young biracial children today, or children that look biracial. And so that you definitely want to have those conversations with them. This was a time when we grew up pre-biracial as even an option. My story actually kind of lived biracialness because we always were around kids who were an extension of the military base, right? So I don't know if your father lended you visual credibility, like when you in your middle school and in your high school, but my dad was always present, right? And so the question of, am I black besides my hair, which kind of answered the question, my father's presence, and to a lesser extent, my mom wasn't very present in those kind of activities, but my dad's visibility, a black male embracing his son in public, kind of answered the question of, well, okay, this cat is one of these biracial kids. So I didn't have to go through the aesthetic or the absence of a perennial kind of assertion in my own blackness.
So just to pause for a second, if you recall, my foray over into fully engaged in blackness and the black community that I was living in and a part of was paralleled or actually onset by the departure of my father. Yep. And when he departed, he was gone.
Yep.
He was gone, man. Like he rests in peace. He died about 4 years ago. So, I've gotten past the negativity there, but there was I didn't even have that connection, not even to have conversations about what was going on, not even to talk about how to be a black man, which is what I felt like and who I felt like, right? Not even to have those conversations, and certainly not to show up anywhere, whether it be a sporting event, a ceremony of graduation, or any of that kind of thing. I mean, that was gone. So all I had, and thankfully, man, because my hero, my superhero is my mama, my white mama, who raised these 3 biracial black kids in that environment. Right. But I'll be honest, man, there were times where I was embarrassed almost that I'm walking with my white mom because I felt black and I wanted to prove it, and that couldn't. I know I'm saying it out of my mouth right now, and it feels crazy, but that was at that point in time.
No, I think you're speaking of something real that biracial kids who are trying to, among their age set and peers, have tremendous power at that stage, and they're not wanting to navigate biracialness at a particular moment, and then a symbol of biracial pops up, in the maternal figure, right? Hopefully that's not the case today, but if you're trying to navigate through your highlightness and just say, hey, I just want to be in blackness and I don't even want the question raised, but then all of a sudden here comes loving mama, and shout out to Mama Boyd. I'm just coming to support the babies, but there's a racial politicalization that occurs that the 10-year-old doesn't have the vocabulary and the nuance to figure it out, but has this moment of pause, right? I was in the group, I had no eyes on me. Now all of a sudden eyes are on me in a way that doesn't say anything about love. The love is there, but it's the identity politic that gets raised in that particular moment.
Hey, Jay, yeah, at 50 years old, man, my 50-year-old birthday, I was with 4 of my best friends that I grew up with in this church, the church that my mom and dad met at, which was a central figure. That was a saving grace in my life, man, from 0 to 19. That church was, right? 4 of my best friends from that church, we were all at dinner with our significant others having this conversation. And they said at the time, I was sharing some of these realities with them. They were like, man, we had no idea. We never saw you as white. In fact, we didn't see your mama as white.
right.
She was the secretary at that church, brother, for 52 years.
Yeah, she was a pillar.
She was a pillar and one of one at that same time, too. There was, a few white folks that trickled in and out during that time period, man. But they were mind blown as well that those, political / 10, 11, 12, 13-year-old realities of looking around and, your mom is representing you. And as I said, in retrospect, man, she was an absolute warrior.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's so real what you're saying.
Man, shout out to Mama Boyd. I don't know. And y'all listening in, y'all feel free to ask questions. This is 1968 and 71. Your kid's probably born in early 2000s. It's a different reality, but biracialness in a highly black and white world, a polarized world, racial lines then and now, the question of membership and things that negotiate, compromise, or challenge membership, young biracial kids are grappling with that. Again, coming off the military space, a lot of my early girlfriends were white, right? They were white, and that was pretty, in that kind of context, it wasn't too crazily frowned upon. Although some of my black female friends, kind of frowned upon that. But I also remember a point where I'm saying, well, hey, I'm developing my identity. Y'all listen to this, y'all. Listen to this. I'm intentionally crafting my identity. And the thing that's perhaps is most vulnerable in who I want to become, which is a contributing black man raising black children with a black wife, those were on my mind. And that shaped my dating habits. That shaped my dating selection kind of partners, because although we can love who we love, I did not want to have to navigate a journey into blackness with a white partner. And this was 16, 17 years old, trying to grapple with these kind of things.
Right.
Man, that's heavy. That's heavy. Jill said,
it parallels. Maybe for slightly different reasons, but our mindset parallel each other in that, man. Hey, I'm gonna tell you this, and you know this, but I'll share it here. I mean, I'm dating a white woman for the first time in my life.
Yeah.
And I'm in love with this person and see this person as my life partner. And early on in that dating relationship, we had some serious conversations and some real conversations about my hangups and about my past and about what having a black woman on my arm meant, which I married twice over. It taking nothing away from the 2 people that I married, but it was in retrospect, it was more about my insecurity, my need to have somebody that looked a certain way and these different things, that ultimately led me to, that decision point, man.
Yeah.
Can you see the screen, AJ? Can you see the screen?
We got to add it. Let me see.
I just tried this. Yeah.
So who's this white dude right here, Gene?
On the right. That's your boy. You see the hair? You see the hair?
Gene. That's Dennis the Menace, man.
Yeah, Dennis the Menace was walking up in the Compton Caldwell Elementary.
Tell me I'm Dr. King.
Wow. Yeah. And that's my brother and my sister who, you can see they had a little bit darker complexion and a little bit darker hair and darker eyes and all that kind of thing, So wow. That was just the reality of my plight. And this is another important point. You can put the screen down, but another important point is every biracial child, even in the same family, is not having the same experience.
Yep.
Not having the same experience because, there's different dynamics as it relates to, being melanated or skin tone and hair, like we already talked about and so forth. So,
yeah. And then also sibling birth order, right?
Absolutely.
the older brother or sister kind of takes the bump, understands how to navigate it, establishes their credibility, and then legitimizes the younger siblings. So Dr. Wynn asked, wow, I wonder if my kids ever felt embarrassed. I don't know, Dr. Wynn, but please know it is not an indictment of the person, the mama. Right. It is a more so if they're trying to navigate through the racial political nuance with their peer groups. And given their age set, their peer group is very, very, very important.
Right.
When I was in Gary, Indiana, and I was just trying to be there, I was just trying not to have any heat come at me. Right. I remember traversing the neighborhood, walking around, going to the corner store, just feeling like a walking exclamation point. You know, people looking at me like I'm a novelty. Right. I did not want to add anything to that. And so when my mother would come to my baseball games, I'd be like, oh, man. And again, it was not a love. It's just that I'm just trying to be a good baseball player. I'm not trying to draw no heat, negative attention at myself. And to have myself pronounced in an additional way was just, there was a lot of dissonance there.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And it's because of the history and the dichotomy of these two, you know, ethnographic, racial identities, or whatever the case we are. I mean, these things have been at odds in this country from the very first day.
Yep.
In a very tumultuous, very hate-filled, in you know, historically way. And so when you're grappling with that identity-wise in the time period that we were growing up, it's heavy. It's just heavy. And you know, I saw Dr. Wynn's comment as well. And I would encourage you to have a conversation. So, you know, communicate that this was a discussion point tonight, and that one of the men on there said that he had this struggle at a certain point in time. But Dr. Wynn, you also hear that I'm proclaiming and always have that my mother is my rock. She is the one of the two parents that through it all, by any means necessary, was going to make sure that we were survivors, not only survivors, but thrivers, and took great pleasure in every single thing that we did, and would give her last cent to make sure that we were okay.
Right. Let me throw one other nuance in here, and then we'll kind of go to when we really felt full membership into Blackness. Again, thank you guys for joining us. Please feel free to ask any questions that you might have on the topic. Given America's history, racialized history, here you are the living embodiment of the two dominant players in that, a Blackness and a whiteness, right? You also have legal precedent established by the one drop rule in Arkansas, Louisiana, that if you have any Black blood in you, you are considered Black. And we know that was for property transmission purposes, but you have a legal precedent. You also have an historical cultural context where no matter how light you were or wherever you were on the cultural spectrum, as long as you could gain an authenticity, you could have membership in Blackness. But I also remember learning about race. There was a clear aggressor, and there was a clear, I don't want to say victim, but a clear unfair recipient of the injustice. And then I remember thinking about which side did I want to associate with, right? And so as biracial kids are thinking through this, they're also thinking through it from a cultural lens, and where do they ultimately want to have membership in? Do they want to be in a whiteness that's generalized as a supremacist history, right? Or do they want to be associated and have membership in a rebellion, a competing people, a resilient people, a story of redemption and uplift, right?
Right.
And for me, I wanted to have a story affiliated with the latter.
Yeah, the same parallel, AJ. Another parallel. Go ahead, another parallel.
And so that journey is what propelled me to literally the summer of my high school, after my senior year in high school, because it was going to be a closure of high school, but I was going to ASU out of state. I was in Las Vegas, Nevada, but I could then leave all of that behind, and I could begin anew, and I could start my own new chapter of life. And I went in there with an intentionality to immerse myself in a Blackness first, but then to become Black. That's odd to say, but I had to get out of the proverbial gray, and I had to land. College was the space for me in that, largely through becoming a member of a Black fraternity, Alpha Phi Alpha. That gave me Black entrance, Black connection, Black network, and Black rhetoric, Black vocabulary, right? Generational handoff. And then also my studies. All of my independent reading was in the space of Black biographical literature. And so having membership in a Black organization and then being able to hold my own in most conversations around Black history, Black theory, that kind of stuff, it just dissolved any of this confusion I had. And there's been times where I've been in a space and I've been vibing and my hand will come out and I go like, dang, my hand's pretty white. And then I go right back into it. Because in my mind, I forget I had.
That's real, man.
Dad, you on here, talk to him.
Yeah.
Jeez, when did you first realize that? When did you take off the biracial jacket and put on your Black jacket?
You know, man, I mentioned the sport theme, and I was always someone who valued my education just as much as the sport part. And I knew that they always would go hand in hand, and then have made, an entire career out of that dichotomy, empowering young people to become better versions of themselves. So hopefully the best version of themselves. But the sport piece is so racialized too.
Yep.
And so, positionally, like, I was an athlete who played positions that predominantly Black youth or young men or even college athletes play.
Right.
I ran track and I was a very good high school hurdler and one of the best in the state of California. Mm-hmm. And so there will be moments in time where that would be put on display, that athletic prowess will be put on display, and people would comment like, man, that white boy is fast. Mm-hmm. And then I would be like, nah, I'm a brother. Mm-hmm. Right. Mm-hmm. So instead of asking for, acceptance, hey man, can't I just be one of the brothers? I'm like, nah, I'm a brother.
Yeah.
I'm a Black man, I'm a Black man. I was playing junior college ball against this school, El Camino College. I was at Cerritos College, and their team was predominantly Black and Polynesian. I played defensive back, so I'm man to man, locked up on the fastest players on the team. Mm-hmm. And every time I would go to their sideline, they would say something like, "Hey, you gonna let this white boy cover you?"
Yeah.
And I'm gonna say it the way that I said it. I said, "Hey, nigga, I'm Black." Mm-hmm. So the N word started to become something at that time too that became a part of my rhetoric. My brother to this day laughs. He says, when you used to get intoxicated when you were a younger man, you started gang banging, right?
Yeah.
So the things that I associated with Blackness in my youth were this gang culture, use of the N-word prolifically, right? And being a dominating athlete. And I packaged those things up for a while and became the Black version of myself. And I proclaimed it. Like, I didn't ask for permission. I said, I am this. And then similar to you, man, when I came to the institution that we both went to undergrad, ASU, I was a history major and I got very involved. It just so happened that there was some student protests happening at the time, and there was a African American studies program that still exists that was created then. Yep. That I dove headfirst into, and like you said, read biographies of strong, Black human beings, and began to do some writing myself personally, and really became committed to the cause of the upliftment of the people in this country. So it was similar, I thought it was a beautiful way that you described what you wanted to be a part of, which part of your, racial identity, you wanted to be more on the side of the story of, and I made a similar choice too, probably around the same time.
No, our lives parallel. Earlier you talked about like the use of the N-word and sort of repping the gang culture, right? Those of y'all listening in, a light-skinned person's trying to find membership. And if they're young, immature, and can't decipher the whole nuance, they go for what they see. And so they might exaggerate or overcompensate. In fact, that was one of the questions, has there been times you've tried to overcompensate for your light-skinnedness? But a lot of times, when you're in certain circles, the four becomes the foe. You You drop them R's, right? Because you're
Right.
trying to fit in linguistically. Sometimes you feel silly, especially when you're not authentic with yourself. But in the inverse, a lot of light-skinned people, in order to have legitimacy, will also then be drawn to the history side of it so they can understand it. Because the question of what is blackness, what am I becoming a member of, at some points transition the surface. It transitions the aesthetic. So let me switch a little bit just to build on the N-word. The first time I got called the N-word, Gene, I was like, yeah, all right. Gene, I was like, I'm in, baby.
Yeah.
The power of language, right? To ostracize and to invite.
Right.
Besides you kind of using it in a defiance of folks, questioning your identity, has that word kind of been nuanced with you?
Well, in the sense that other urban grown youth that had backgrounds like the permission to use the word freely amongst your black cohorts is that validation, right? I I remember playing the same football game that I described earlier, and me and this big brother from the other team, we were pushing each other after the play, and we were hitting each other in the face mask. I think we both got penalties, and I said something like, he said something to me. I said something like, "Nigga, you tripping?" And he was like, "He just called me a nigger." I said, "No, I didn't say nigger. I said nigga."
Yeah,
right?
must be a race ride.
And then we started laughing together, and then he was like, "Oh, you black?" I'm like, "Yeah, I'm black."
Yeah.
So this is not to draw affirmation to the use of the N-word, because that's a whole nother session.
Yeah, no.
Right?
No.
But it is to say that in certainly that era of black culture, gang culture, young black male culture, it was a word that took on a meaning that was not the slave master's designation, but more of a transitory, even greeting / there's so many different things that were associated with it. And so I'm just using those examples because that, for me, in my biracialness, trying to be a culturally black man and being accepted in using it at the time was kind of that moment where it's like, okay, yeah, I'm in.
Yeah, and by no means is this an examination of the word, although I'd love to be a part of that conversation should we decide to do it.
Right.
What it is biracial, grabbing at limbs for authentic membership.
Right.
And one of the ways peers control access is through language, through aesthetics, through an invitation, right? There's all of these low-hanging fruits that a biracial kid kind of coming into their own, they're going to grab on. And one of them, what is permissible language, testing it. So white moms out there, or biracial black sons, you're going to perhaps see moments of hyper blackness in your children because they're trying to play with identity and they're using the symbols of identity. That's just a transition that they're going through. I remember kind of being at odds with my mother because she would try to suppress anything that I would do that was kind of trying to exalt a blackness. She was grappling with that in some kind of way. And those are moments of dissonance between my mother and I. And I think that's in part because her European assessment of blackness was that of the time. And she had her own notions around stereotypes associated with blackness and had a certain cautionary approach to me in terms of not displaying those kind of stereotypes. But that was always a rub for us.
Yeah. All right. I think actually, let me do one other thing. Yeah. Diction, right? Language. Yeah. You touched on it a little bit, taking the ing off and adding, and ending something with an A or whatever the case is, right? It's so interesting, man, even to this day, because I have never forcefully, again, growing up in the formative years of the 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th grade, the diction was the diction. The street speak was the street speak. And I've never forced myself to have a corporate dialect. And so what ends up happening a lot of time, even today, like literally today,
Yep.
is that someone will see me and hear me talk, and they go, "Oh, where's your accent from?
Mm-hmm.
You must be from the East Coast or from the South."
No, that's Compton, baby.
Yeah, I said, "Yeah, I'm from the South, South Central LA."
Mm-hmm.
Right? So I mean, I think that's been a little bit of an acceptance, but also one that professionally I've had to contend with
Yeah.
because again, this is all subconscious.
Yeah.
It's all subconscious. But when I was trying to climb the ladder professionally, I had one of my supervisors, one of my bosses at the time, tell me that, hey, we came out of this meeting and some of the feedback from some of the people in the meeting was, you talk like a football player.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I
We
said,
know
what?
that.
What do you mean?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
That's cold. That's cold for something.
Right.
And I think I know what they're saying, but
No.
that experience is real too.
Yeah, you're bringing up something that I knew intuitively, but I finally got language for it in college about code switching.
Yeah, for sure.
Right. But then I even struggled with that. Right. Why does my authentic voice have to code switch to some common voice? And so even today, I'll intentionally nuance culture. I'll intentionally pronounce certain words in a certain kind of way or inject cultural examples. It's just a way of saying, hey, I'm in this space as well, right? I believe common space has common rules, social contract rules, but increasingly so, like yourself, I challenge those boundaries at different times. All right, we are getting close to the hour. I really want to get some questions if y'all have them. We've had consistently some good numbers in here, as I always like to jokingly say. We went viral.
Five or more.
Yeah, if you have questions, but Gene, let's close out maybe with a certain kind of intuitive understanding. We don't really know what it means to be born in 2003 if your son is 18 years old and biracial, but what are some recommendations that you might have to mothers, raising aesthetically light-skinned kids in the 21st century? Any recommendations you might have, and I'll start us off as you think about that.
Yeah, go ahead.
In the technological age, it's very easy to get information in sound bites and news splashes through the social media. Please encourage your beautiful sons and daughters to read biographies, to read things that they're hearing about, that reference culture and help give explanation. Something that'll give them a depth, because as we talked about before, culture is more than just aesthetics. How you talk, how you walk, what you listen to, how you dress, and your language. Culture is a current measurement of an historical journey. And the beautiful young people need to know something about that journey. So I always like to say E185. Every library in every nation has a section called E185. That is where the nonfiction Black books are. E185. Get a library card and encourage your beautiful babies to up their reading game in subject matter of their culture and their history. That's one.
Yeah, I would say an interracial parent, right? An interracial parent is two racial identities having a child together. That's where biracial comes from. An interracial parent has a responsibility to equally educate their child. So AJ's talking about a nuance of the education, which is reading about, learning, and so forth. But to equally educate their child about both parts of their identity, because that child has that moment coming that AJ and I both described, where they're going to probably embrace, especially if you're biracial, Black and white, one or the other a bit more. But in all fairness, they should have all the data that they can have about that decision point. I would say I've probably come full circle to where I'm comfortable in my biracialness. I understand that, that lighter skin represents something. And my mother, we have on her side of the family, a family reunion every 4 or 5 years. And so I know the whole cultural, historical lineage about traveling from Germany and all that stuff on that side.
Right.
But on my father's side, because he departed when I was so young, didn't know the family, it's been difficult. And so Black history became my family on that side.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
I embraced those stories. I mean, I saw those as my forefathers and grandfathers and uncles and so forth. And, you know, my mother was just trying to make ends meet and just trying to survive when we were growing up. And so, but she surrounded us around Black men who could serve as role models and who could speak into our hearts and minds, or Black women for that matter, as an extension of family. And so we got that on both sides and were able to be informed. And so an interracial parent has a responsibility to make sure that child understands that there is this dichotomy, and that there are things to value about both sides. And then there's some bullshit on both sides too.
Right, right. You know, Gene, that's very interesting. My mother was from France, and so it was difficult to spend time on her side of the family, with the exception of 3 years when we lived in Italy. So I didn't really have the white connect, but I definitely had it with my dad. And so my familial cultural ground has always been, you know, the Joneses and the Alexanders, which are Black Creole kind of communities. And so, and then there's the whole Creole piece, which there's a certain kind of almost exaggerated uplift of light-skinnedness playing itself out. But you're absolutely right. You know, in the family space, nuclear space, you got to love both. You got to have an understanding of things. But as Gene talked about, it's very likely your son and or daughter will lean one particular way. And that's not an indictment on either parent. It's probably the evidence of cultural pressure and just a sense of belonging. The last thing I'll share, Gene, and I'll give you last final thoughts. This has been tremendously reflective and insightful and fun. If you have a question or a comment, this is the time to throw it in. You know, take a look at us, give us a subscribe, tell folks about us. We'd love to grow the community. So this recently happened. My children they look biracial. And my son came to me and he says, "Dad, you didn't teach me culture." Because what he found himself is when he was among his peer group, because he went to predominantly white schools, small. So now he's in a Black frat and Black spaces. And there's all of these icon conversations, you know, sayings, phrases, movie references, songs, those kind of things. And he felt like we denied him. He felt like we denied him a cultural capital, a cultural cachet that he uses and inferences to establish a cultural know, KNOW, among his peer group. Now, although many times I tried to get him to sit down and watch some things with me, he doesn't remember that. But what he's saying is that I lack cultural cachet. And biracial kids, parents, if you can give them exposure to music, rappers delight, you got to let them know that the Message, NWA, East Coast rap, certain kind of movies, Malcolm X, Amistad, but just give them that stuff, not only for familiarity and cultural milestones, but also so they can have that cachet that's necessary to hold their own in banter, small talk among their peers, Black peers. Gene, last thoughts.
Yeah, you know, you can't overestimate the power of one's truth. And you know, we are told stories, we make up stories, right? And this mixture of those kind of becomes our young minds' reality. And you know, the human experience, each individual human being has worth. And I think the more that we can empower our young men and women to understand that their worth starts with their birth, not their skin tone or their, you know, their level of melanin, the brown paper bag test. Remember that from back in the day and all. But you know, your worth starts from your birth, and as you build people up and give them as much truth and information for them to learn from as they possibly can, then and then, you know, we have so many contemporary events going on that are, you know, this deal with the Kid Rittenhouse most recently, that verdict was, it's one where the Black community is saying like, hey, if that was us, if that was me, I never would have even got into that space with that gun, right? And look at what the justice system did. Where on the flip side of it, I've got to admit that if I had all the data, then perhaps it was self-defense. I mean, not to get into the politics of all of that, but being able to have open-minded, even keeled conversations about these realities too are important. Not just to take a side that's illogical or non-fact based in the times that we live in. We got to have honest, real, fact-based conversations with our young people in time and space.
Gene, I think that's a hell of a way to close it, man. Your worth is from your birth. Your worth is from your birth. America is still grappling with itself and its history. Trends will suggest that there's going to be more biracial children. It was 1% when Gene and I were born. It's upwards of 14% today. Race has taken on different meaning, different nuances. And so I think, we're going to increasingly see a population that will voice itself differently. When I was growing up, the option of biracial or two or more races was not even something to select. There was a certain kind of force that you had to be forced into a certain kind of identity. That's changing. But beautiful mothers and beautiful fathers raising these beautiful biracial children, the dynamic of who am I is a vexing, perplexed, but very dominant question. Please don't avoid the question with your beautiful sons and daughters, especially daughters when it comes to romance and love, but of course your sons as well. If Gene or I can be of any resource to you, please hit us up in the YouTube space. Contact information is there.
Absolutely.
Thank you guys so much for joining us. Your worth comes from your birth, whether that's to a Black mama, Chicano mama, Native mama, whatever the case may be, Black daddy, whatever the case may be, white daddy, whatever the case may be. You are here, baby. Live your life in a positive way. And in the J4 spirit, raise grounded, independent, and confident sons. That's what we're about. J4 family, love, 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 love. Thank you so much. Peace, love. We out.